She was not breaking any rules. She wasn't trespassing. She was not even making a sound. She was simply walking home, just like she had done every evening after work. But in the shadows of her own neighborhood, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, followed by a voice that carried more arrogance than authority. Before she could even explain who she was, before she could even take another step, the guard's hand went to his weapon. A gun was drawn on her, on a woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong. What he didn't know, what would turn this entire night on its head, was that she wasn't just any woman. She wasn't just another target for intimidation. She was someone who had dedicated her life to justice, someone trained for moments far worse than this, someone with the power to turn the entire situation upside down. Because this innocent woman the HOA guard thought he could threaten was an FBI tactical commander. And what unfolded next would not only shake the guard to his core, but also expose the ugly reality of prejudice that still hides in plain sight in communities across America. But before we get there, let's go back. Back to how an ordinary night in a quiet neighborhood turned into a standoff that no one could have predicted. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, if you believe the truth should never be silenced, make sure you stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that matter. Her name was Jordan Matthews. On paper, she was the kind of neighbor any community would be proud to have. Respectful, hardworking, dedicated. By day, she was an FBI tactical commander, overseeing some of the most complex training operations in the country. But by night, she was simply Jordan, the woman who walked her dog, watered her plants, and waved politely to neighbors as she made her way back from long shifts at work. Jordan had moved into this neighborhood 2 years earlier, buying a home with her savings after years of hard work and sacrifice. She wanted peace, stability, and a safe place to come home to after the chaos of her career. But she also knew that as a black woman, even in neighborhoods that promised safety and community, there were unspoken rules, sideways glances, and doors that didn't always open as easily as they should. Still, Jordan carried herself with quiet confidence. She didn't announce her job. She didn't flaunt her authority. Most of her neighbors had no idea she worked for the FBI, and she preferred it that way. After all, home was supposed to be the one place where she could breathe, away from the intensity of her professional life. But beneath the manicured lawns and gated entrances of this HOA-run neighborhood, tension simmered. Residents whispered about outsiders and security concerns. New rules seemed to appear without explanation, rules that always seemed to fall hardest on certain homeowners. And then came the guard, a man hired by the HOA to patrol the neighborhood, but who acted less like a peacekeeper and more like a self-appointed sheriff. To Jordan, he was just background noise until one night he was not. It was late, nearly 10 p.m., when Jordan parked her car near the entrance of the community. She had been at headquarters all day, running tactical simulations with her team. Her muscles ached, her mind was foggy, but she felt that small sense of relief that came with being home. The air was cool, her street was quiet, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But as she walked, she noticed headlights creeping behind her. Not the casual roll of a neighbor coming home, this was slower, deliberate, and predatory, a vehicle tailing her every step. She kept walking, her senses sharpening, trained instincts kicking in, but she didn't want to jump to conclusions. Then came the flash of a spotlight, a beam that locked on her back like a target. "Hey, stop right there." The voice was harsh, commanding, not the tone of someone ensuring safety, but the tone of someone itching for confrontation. Jordan froze for half a second, then turned slowly. It was the HOA security guard. His uniform was unprofessional, but the swagger in his stance was undeniable. His hand hovered close to his belt, too close to the holster clipped at his side. "What are you doing here?" he barked. Jordan blinked. What was she doing here? She lived here. She paid dues here. She owned her home here. But in his eyes, none of that mattered. He didn't see her as a homeowner. He didn't see her as someone who belonged. He saw her as a threat. She calmly reached for her ID badge, her voice steady. But before she could even hold it up, his hand went to his weapon. The sound of metal brushing against leather, the gun halfway drawn. In that moment, Jordan felt the weight of every story she had ever read, every case she had ever worked, and every family who had sat across from her in grief after losing someone to a split second of racial profiling. And now, here she was, living it. Her heartbeat was steady, but her mind raced. One wrong move, and she wouldn't just be a headline, she would be another name, another investigation, another case where the truth was buried under excuses. The guard's voice rose. "Answer me! What are you doing here this late?" Jordan locked eyes with him. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. But deep down, she knew this was no longer about her words. This was about his assumptions, his fear, his power trip. And with each second that passed, the danger escalated. The gun was out now, fully drawn, the muzzle angled in her direction. Jordan stood still, her pulse controlled, her breathing steady. Her training was the only thing keeping her grounded, but even with all her expertise, she understood the razor-thin margin between survival and tragedy. The neighborhood was silent. Porch lights flickered on as blinds shifted, curious neighbors peering out, recording on their phones. They saw a guard doing his job, but none of them knew who the woman facing him really was. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice trembling, betraying the fear behind his bravado. Jordan slowly raised her hands, not in surrender, but in calculation. Every movement deliberate, every breath measured. And then, with a calmness that cut through the chaos, she spoke, not to plead, not to explain, but to reveal. "You need to put that weapon down. Right now." The guard sneered. "Or what?" Jordan's eyes didn't waver. She lowered her hands just enough to reveal the badge clipped inside her jacket. Not a driver's license, not a neighborhood ID, but a shield, gleaming, unmistakable, carrying 3 letters that carried the weight of authority he could never match. FBI. The crowd gasped, the guard's hand shook. His face drained of color. In that instant, the entire power dynamic shifted. The man who thought he held control, who believed he had the right to intimidate, realized he had just drawn a weapon on someone who not only outranked him, but who had the power to dismantle everything he thought he controlled. Jordan's voice cut through the silence once more. "You just pointed a gun at an FBI tactical commander in her own neighborhood." And with that, the illusion of his authority shattered. The guard stammered, his weapon lowering, his excuses spilling out faster than his thoughts could form. But the damage was done. Cameras had caught everything. Neighbors who once stayed silent now had footage of a man whose prejudice had almost turned deadly. Jordan didn't raise her voice. She didn't retaliate. She didn't need to. Her presence, her badge, and the truth of what had just happened were enough. She filed her report, documented every second, and made sure the guard's actions would not be buried beneath excuses or forgotten in silence. In the weeks that followed, the HOA scrambled. Meetings were called, statements were issued, and quietly, the guard who had once strutted through the neighborhood was gone. His uniform returned, his authority stripped. But for Jordan, the impact went deeper than paperwork or consequences. It was a reminder of how quickly life could change, not because of what she had done, but because of what someone assumed about her skin, her presence, her very right to exist in her own community. And she knew her story wasn't unique. It was one thread in a much larger tapestry of injustice, one more example of how dangerous bias can become when armed with power. She returned to her home each night the same way she always had, with dignity, with strength, with the knowledge that she belonged. But the question lingered, echoing long after the headlines faded. How many more people have to prove who they are, survive intimidation, or reveal a badge just to be treated like they belong in their own neighborhood? And more importantly, when will the world finally learn that no badge, no title, no rank should be required for someone to simply live without fear? If you believe this is a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth acting on, don't let it end here. Watch, share, comment, and subscribe, because stories like Jordan's matter. And until we listen, until we change, they will keep happening.